What's up everybody, it's me, your favorite little boy in the whole wide world, Ren with 2 N's. And every now and then, a product comes out that makes me incredibly upset. A product that lights such a fire within my soul that I feel like I need to forge a full-on investigation to understand just exactly what went wrong. And today, that thing just so happens to be The Kingsman 2, The Golden Circle, which is unfortunately a terrible, horrible movie. And I am 100% certain that studio interference is what ruined this movie. So my goal is to try and use this video to prove that to you. And I have done extensive research across the entire internet, on all the websites like gowoggly.com, Bingy, Yahoo, and Ask Jeeves. I've been everywhere. So here's what I think happened. The first Kingsman movie was a surprise hit. It had a budget of $81 million and made over 5 times that worldwide. So with money like that flying in, I think that someone at 20th Century Fox smelled a franchise on their hands. So naturally they greenlit a sequel. Now typically when a studio goes all out on a production like this, they naturally want to safeguard their money. So that usually means they come in and water down the original creative vision and mold it into something that usually seems safer and familiar. Something that doesn't feel too risky, so that they're more guaranteed to get a return on their investment. And it's happened with all sorts of movies over the years. Movies like Fantastic Four, X-Men Origins Wolverine, and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And while The Golden Circle isn't nearly as bad as any of those, it's still a complete and total mess. Hey, hold on, wait a sec. Much like Kingsman: The Golden Circle, 2 of those movies were also produced by 20th Century Fox. That's pretty weird, huh? But surely this must just be a coincidence. But I can see it now. The CEO of 20th Century Fox is sitting in his office, drinking his coffee and snorting his cocaine when the phone rings. He answers it and says, "CEO of Fox speaking." A voice on the other end of the phone tells him how much money the first Kingsman made. 400 million smackers, you say? Why, that's one hell of a smash hit. Thanks for the news, Jimmy. He hangs up his phone, pops his head outside the door, and says to his assistant, "Hey, sweetie, tell the boys with the pencils to write up another Kingsman movie. I want to buy another house for my dog, and don't bother me till it's done. I'll be in my office molesting women." Then he closes the door, and that's that. Now, let's quit fluffing around and talk about the movie, shall we? Now before we begin, I should warn you that I will be spoiling both Kingsman: The Secret Service and Kingsman: The Golden Circle. But I should also warn you that The Golden Circle is hardcore trash and is not worth watching. And nothing proves that more than this weirdo does. Here he is, getting paid to talk about The Golden Circle with all these A-list celebrities, but he clearly doesn't want to talk about the movie. He's got bigger and better things on his mind.
Considering you have a lasso, I just can't help but think you and Wonder Woman fighting. How cool that would be. Now, Mr. Bridges, I know you get asked about Big Lebowski all the time, but I genuinely want to know what the dude would do if he was a statesman.
He would have to be.
By the way, I really enjoyed Kidnap. By the way.
Oh,
my wife and I.
thank you. Thanks for saying that.
My wife and I went and saw it, and we were just blown away. You were awesome in that movie.
So the movie opens up right outside the Kingsman Taylor shop, where Eggsy is approached by a shady figure, a shady man, who pulls a gun on him and tells him to get in the car. And then we are immediately thrust into an action scene. Now this action scene is actually pretty good. It's very well choreographed, it's very well shot. There's really nothing wrong with it, apart from some bad CG here and there, but as an audience, we didn't have any time to prepare for this. We are literally 45 seconds into this movie, and these two just start fighting with no build-up. We're not given any time to ease into the movie. So right out of the gate, I already feel like this movie is keeping me at an arm's length. It's not allowing me to become invested. So after this scene, Eggsy escapes by driving his car underwater, classic, and going to this secret little hideout where we learn that Eggsy has a very important dinner to get to. So important that he jumps into a sewer and swims home. But uh-oh! The robot arm that Eggsy conveniently didn't notice starts hacking into the Kingsman database. Wow, the Kingsmen are surprisingly easy to hack. You'd think that something like this would trip some sort of alarm or something, but I guess not. Oh well, just keep eating your popcorn and don't think about it. Anyway, Eggsy gets home and he's covered in sewer poop, and this is where we learn that Eggsy is living with the princess from the first movie. I'm sure y'all remember this chick.
Sorry, love. Gotta save the world.
If you save the world, we can do it in the asshole.
Now, this relationship doesn't work for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's against Kingsman policy to be in a serious relationship.
I know it's against Kingsman rules, having a relationship.
Secondly, the fact that Eggsy has settled down with one woman totally ruins the fantasy that these types of movies go for. Hardcore players, such as myself, really relate to the fact that James Bond is a bad boy who can't be tamed, who can't be shackled to one lady. In each movie, he's got a new gal around his arm. Liar. But on top of that, the princess's character doesn't add anything to the movie apart from some forced conflict. But we'll talk about that later. So then we cut to Eggsy, who is having a little get-together with all his remedial friends. This, by the way, was the big important dinner that Eggsy couldn't miss. Now this scene has almost nothing to do with the entire movie, but I bring it up because it has one of the only good transitions in the whole movie. Now the first Kingsman was loaded with some pretty genius transition, and it bears mention because that movie was so well paced. It had such a great flow to it. There was so much thought and care put into each and every transition. The way the movie revealed visual information to the audience and the characters was masterful, and it's something that's completely lacking from Kingsman: The Golden Shower. Hey, what kind of dog is that? A Mech Russell Terrier? A Robo Senji? A Clunker Spaniel? Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. I'm losing the plot, so let's move on. In this next scene, we get introduced to Poppy, the villain of the movie, who is played by Julianne Moore. Here we learn that Poppy has her own island. She's also a drug kingpin and runs her elite top secret group known as the Golden Circle. But we'll talk more about her character later because right now we have to go to the briefing where Lancelot is given the task of trying to figure out exactly what the Golden Circle is. This scene also directly quotes the Secret Service,
Still fucking spectacular, eh?
as well as shows us a clip of the first movie, just to remind you that it existed. Make sure you reference the first movie. People love fan service. But there's no time to think about that right now because Eggsy's gotta meet his girlfriend's parents, which is exactly what I want to see in my fantastical spy action movie. So during this scene, Lancelot is feeding Eggsy information through their glasses so that he can impress his girlfriend's parents. Meanwhile, one of his remedial friends, who is dog-sitting for him, accidentally opens up Eggsy's secret gun compartment. You would think Eggsy would make that a little bit harder to access. As it is now, my girlfriend's cat could accidentally unravel a massive government secret. But hey, it doesn't really matter because shortly after, the entire house gets blown up by a missile. In fact, every single Kingsman just gets blown up, including Lancelot, who was kind of a big deal in the first movie. And she was all over the posters for this movie, only to get blown up after 2 minutes and 4 seconds of screen time. Tough break for that actress, I guess. So everything that the first movie built up, apart from Eggsy and Merlin, is all just thrown out the window in one fell swoop. All so that they can introduce the Statesmen. Then cut to Poppy, who's given her right-hand man a new right hand. They loved that ethnic lady's knife legs in the first movie, so you gotta have a robot arm in this one. Get on it. Now look, I understand that everybody he knows died, but nobody wants to see a Kingsman cry. Whatever happened to stiff upper lip? You remember that scene in James Bond when James Bond just started sobbing uncontrollably because the love of his life died in his arms? Oh, wait a second. You mean that scene doesn't exist? Now, I get that Galahad is crying for comedic purposes, but I really don't think the joke landed here, and it feels really out of character and kind of out of place.
There's no time for emotion in this scenario. We follow the Doomsday Protocol. When that's done, you may shed a tear in private.
So they find out where the Statesmen are located, and as they're trying to enter the compound with all their gadgets that still somehow work, despite not being connected to a mother base or anything like that, they get confronted by Channing Tatum, who then immediately knocks them out. You gotta put Channing Tatum in the movie, cause then all the broads are gonna wanna come and see it. They loved him in Magical Michael. Now, Channing Tatum is trying to get information from our heroes, and as this happens, it is revealed to us that Colin Firth's character is still alive. Now, this is a pretty big deal, because in the middle of the first movie, Colin Firth got shot in the head. Colin Firth got Kurt Cobained. This was a very shocking and memorable moment, but luckily the Statesmen have conveniently invented a device that can cure a bullet to the brain. You gotta have Colin Firth in the movie again. They all loved him in the first one. Now this is just awful, because what they've done is introduced a storytelling device that allows them to basically bring characters back from the dead, which not only forces you to suspend your disbelief beyond belief, but it also lowers the stakes pretty significantly. So what if Eggsy gets shot in the head? They'll just bring him back to life. So what if Lancelot gets blown up? Who's to say the Statesmen won't invent a device that cures explosions? Maybe they've got her DNA in a petri dish somewhere, and they'll just recreate her at some point. As a result of this, anytime a major character dies, I'm just not gonna care, because there's a good chance they could just bring that character back. But of course, Colin Firth has amnesia and doesn't have any memory of being a Kingsman. Now isn't that fun? That's certainly what I wanted to see when I bought my ticket for this movie, was watch Colin Firth freak out like grandpa with Alzheimer's. So moving along, we learn that Poppy has kidnapped Elton John. Y'all know who Elton John is. He's that famous musician. He sang some hot classics, like The Rocket Man. He also sang Benny Has Tourette's, but he is most well known for my personal favorite song of his, Green Day, a classic, a beauty. And now he's in this movie, and it's terrible. They literally gave Elton John one joke, and he repeats it over and over and over throughout the entire movie.
Fuck you!
What have you done to me, you fucking bitch?
Elton, just calm down. Fuck you.
Stay there, Elton.
Fuck off, or I'll fuck you up.
Fuck you, Poppy. Fuck you, Poppy.
Fuck you, Elton.
Isn't it just so funny that they got the Sir Elton Jonathan to say the F-bomb? Anyway, moving along, Elton John starts to turn blue.
I guess that's why they call it the blues.
After that, we get introduced to Jeff Bridges, and I have no idea why he's in this movie. You gotta get Jeff Bridges in there because the grandpas love him. They'll think it's a Western, and they'll buy a ticket because they don't know any better. He has about 4 minutes of screen time and adds absolutely nothing to the movie. They obviously threw him into this thing just so they could have another big name on the poster. And in this scene, Channing Tatum also starts to turn blue. So then Eggsy informs Jeff Bridges about the Golden Circle. Jeff Bridges then agrees that the Golden Circle needs to be stopped. So he pairs up Eggsy with Agent Whiskey, played by Pedro Pascal, who honestly does a really good job with what he's given. He plays this character very well, and I really like him in this. So Halle Berry and Bald Boy want to get rid of Colin Firth's amnesia. So they fill up his room with water to try and make him remember his Kingsman training, and it doesn't work. I'm not a fan of this scene, because they make Colin Firth look like an absolute total cuck. In fact, they make him look like that in most of the movie. And nobody wants to see Colin Firth like this, screaming for his life. He looks pathetic. They make him seem like such a sad old man, and it's depressing. They basically ruined his character. I mean, this is the guy who always held it together. He always kept his cool, no matter what the situation, like a proper Kingsman. And when people came to see this movie, they didn't come to see Colin Firth like this. This is embarrassing. They came to this movie to see more stuff like this, not garbage like this.
I want to go home. I want my butterfly collection. I want to see Mother.
Literally nobody wants to see this. You have made this character look weak and pathetic now. Where he was once a strong and capable daddy, he is now a weak and feeble granny. But Eggsy's got a mission to do. He's got a golden circle to catch, so he's got to say goodbye to his girlfriend when she makes a direct reference to the first movie.
Gotta go save the world?
Yep.
Well, if you save the world, you know what that means.
Here we learn that Eggsy has found out who the bad guy's girlfriend is. So their first objective is to go to Poppy's right-hand man's girlfriend. Once they find her, Eggsy has to seduce her in order to put a tracker in her. And the only way to put this tracker in her is by putting it into one of her mucous membranes.
Mucous membrane? That's like up the nose, isn't it? What the fuck am I gonna do? Stick the thing... It's not just inside the nose, is it?
No, Eggsy, it ain't.
So they put the tracker on the tip of this Chinese condom. And the only way to properly track her is to put it inside her lady barrel. But of course, being in a committed relationship, Eggsy just isn't comfortable with this. So he calls his girlfriend to tell her that he's about to give a little midnight slammin' to another chick. Now naturally, she doesn't like this, so she gets upset and smokes some doobies. But Eggsy finds a compromise and he just sticks his finger in her gupta. Now, understandably, a lot of people have issues with this scene. In all honesty, I found it to be kind of funny, only because it plays this epic spy music as the camera zooms into her hymen holder. But I do take issue with this scene, not for the sexual content, but because overall, it's really lazy. So you're telling me that despite having all this advanced high-end technology, things like a bulletproof tuxedo, things like a wristwatch that can hack anything with a microchip in it, yet they haven't developed a tracker that works without having to put it inside somebody's baby pumper? Oh, baby pumper. I'm gonna trademark that one. What do they do when they have to track a guy? Slide it in his bummy, his anus hole, with my finger, mother. I mean, you could just put a tracker on her phone, could you not? You could also use your wristwatch to hack her phone, right? It just doesn't make any sense. This scene was only inserted into this movie because it creates a forced conflict between Eggsy and his girlfriend, which really does absolutely nothing to enhance this movie. It just bogs the movie down with more bloated crap.
I'm out here hiding in the middle of nowhere, homesick, because I sell drugs.
Oh, Pogs, you're doing this because you're homesick.
I want freedom. I want fame.
So now we've learned Poppy's motivation, and it's pretty lazy. The reason she wants to kill billions of people is so that she can be recognized as someone of power, as a successful businesswoman, so she can go back to America since she's tired of being stuck on an island. And that's it. Poppy is a terrible villain with next to no character.
Julianne, will you please set the movie up for us, because you have a crucial and very important role in this film.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, there's always, well, I'm the villain. There's always a villain in a Kingsman film, so the spies have somebody to fight, I guess. And so, but now they're the Kingsmen and they're the Statesmen. So Jeff is from the Statesmen, they're from the Kingsmen. I'm the villain. I don't know.
In the first Kingsman movie, Valentine was an incredible villain. He had depth, he had charisma, and he had a fantastic motivation. He wanted to kill billions of people because he thought that was basically the only way to save the world from pollution and overpopulation. He thought that he was the good guy, which is what made him such a compelling villain. And then the fact that he wanted to kill everybody in the most brutal and violent way possible, but couldn't stand violence himself or the sight of blood, was fascinating. But Poppy, on the other hand, doesn't have any real quirks and has a very one-dimensional motivation of wanting to go back to America. So after that, Eggsy is hanging out at a bar when he suddenly comes up with a plan to cure Colin Firth's amnesia. His plan involves getting a dog and aiming a gun at its head, which does make sense in the context of the movie. Long story short, the plan works, and now we have Harry back. And at this point in the movie, I was like, okay, we got the crew back together. Maybe now the movie will start getting good. I couldn't have been more wrong. Quickly after that, our new ensemble is at a bar when we hear a raunchy southerner mouth off to Harry.
Like faggot fucking.
Harry doesn't like this, and yeah, I'm looking at my watch. We haven't had a proper action scene in over an hour, so Harry decides to recreate another scene from the first movie. But of course, since he's only just been cured of his amnesia moments ago, he's not as skilled as he used to be. He's a bit rusty, which to be fair, does make sense. But again, nobody wants to see Harry like this. It's sad. It's like watching your dad lose a fight. I will admit though that this is a pretty neat action scene. Pedro Pascal grabs a knife with his lasso and then he wraps it around a guy until it stabs him in the chest. I like that. That's creative. But we don't have time to enjoy that because Poppy finally reveals her plan internationally on this TV brought to you by Sony. Turns out she put a virus into all the drugs in the world, which is why everybody's turning blue. And she's gonna let them all die unless all the world leaders make all the drugs legal. Because then once all the drugs are legal, she can come back to America. It's a great plan. And the president of America is actually okay with this, because he's going to be the first ever president to win the war on drugs. Now, smash cut to Channing Tatum, who is dancing, because that's one of the symptoms of Poppy's virus. It makes you dance uncontrollably before you freeze in place and then die. Isn't that just wacky? So to prevent Channing Tatum from dying, they put him in a cryo chamber for the rest of the movie. Yeah, you heard me correctly. A-list actor Channing Tatum, who did next to nothing in this movie, who's on all the posters and all the trailers, gets put to sleep like the neighbor's dog after a measly 9 minutes and 59 seconds of screen time. He's essentially thrown into this movie as an afterthought. So now, thanks to that tracker Eggsy put inside that woman's baby pumper, we find out that Poppy's right-hand man is in Italy. So our ensemble goes there in the hopes that they can get the antidote for themselves, so they can synthesize it and cure the virus before too many people start dying. So they sneak into one of Poppy's secret bases and steal a bottle of the antidote. But of course, they get caught in the process. So Poppy's right-hand man, this guy right here, whose name is Charlie, pulls out his iPad brought to you by Apple and attempts to stop Eggsy and Agent Whiskey by making the cable car that they're inside of start spinning really fast. Yeah, I wish I was making this up. The first time I saw this movie, this was the moment I completely checked out of it. I was on the fence up until this point, but now I'm done. It completely lost me. But hey, maybe Harry, who sat at the computer, can hack into that cable car and make it stop spinning.
All the buttons are dead. Control's gone. Everything's in shutdown. You're on your own, Eggsy.
That's the Kingsman I know and love, the kind that just gives up at the first obstacle he encounters. So Pedro Pascal pulls out his magical electric whip, which has yet to be established in this movie, to put a hole in the glass. And that winds up accidentally cutting one of the cables, which causes them to slide down this mountain towards a bunch of old people. But before they're able to squash all the elderlies, Eggsy grabs Pedro and puts him up against the window and pulls his parachute to slow them down. Now, how did Eggsy know that Pedro even had a parachute? We were never shown that he had one, and Eggsy was never told that he had a parachute on it. Whatever, just eat your popcorn, don't think about it, idiots. So the boys run away and hide out in a cabin when they get ambushed by some goons. And Agent Whiskey pushes Eggsy to safety, accidentally causing him to drop the antidote. Now this makes Harry think that Agent Whiskey is a traitor, so he shoots him in the head. But luckily they can cure headshots, am I right? We get to just shoot people in the head willy-nilly. But quickly after that, we find out that Eggsy's girlfriend is turning blue because she did drugs. So the Kingsmen come to the decision to go to Poppy's Island all by themselves, since any one of the Statesmen could be corrupt like Pedro. This logic checks out. So they hop on a plane and get some new gadgets, like a baseball that explodes, and a baseball bat that doubles as a minesweeper. Meanwhile, Whiskey wakes up and gets his amnesia instantly cured by Halle Berry. But in this scene, we also learn that Whiskey used to have a wife who died. Now this comes into play later. Now the Kingsmen are making their way towards Poppy's place, but the entire island is littered with landmines. But luckily, they got that sweet minesweeper, which will tell them where every landmine is so that they don't step on a mine, right? I mean, if I had a minesweeper, I could guarantee you that I wouldn't step on a mine. You'd have to be a proper mongoloid to step on a landmine, eh, bruv? It's pretty simple stuff, really. Minesweepers are very easy to use. You scan it over the ground. If you hear it beep, that means there's a mine there, so you don't step there. Got it? So yeah, Eggsy the genius steps on a landmine, which is one of the most idiotic things I have ever seen. You're telling me that this guy right here, the guy who is observant enough to know that this was a one-way mirror, the guy who can do things like this, and this, is dumb enough to step on a landmine? Could you imagine if James Bond stepped on a landmine? That'd be the most retarded thing you ever saw. James Bond doesn't step on landmines like some stupid little kid from Egypt. He gets rid of landmines like the true hero he is.
You have been given license to kill. I'm now giving you a license to save.
Daniel Craig has been given a special new mission. Yeah, the James Bond actor has been appointed as the first UN global advocate for the elimination of mines and explosive hazards.
I cannot express to you how much this pisses me off. In the context of this movie, killing off a major character, a Kingsman no less, one of the most capable people in the world, by having him step on a landmine is the laziest and most undignified way to kill off a Kingsman. I mean, if it was his mom or something, sure, she'll step on a landmine. Fine, I got it. But anyway, Merlin sprays the landmine with some frosty spray brought to you by Wendy's. But the catch is, it'll only freeze the landmine for a little while, so they don't have much time. So instead of running away, Merlin knocks Eggsy off of the landmine and steps on it himself. Then, Merlin starts singing Country Road by my favorite singer, Bob Dallas, which lures in a bunch of bad guys, and then he blows them up. This doesn't make any sense. Shouldn't Poppy's goons have a pretty good idea of where all the landmines are located? And furthermore, why are they walking towards Merlin? Why not just shoot him? Wouldn't that be easier? Like, what are you doing? His death had absolutely no impact on me. Because like I said, for all I know, they could just bring him back in the next movie. They really pooched it. Then right after that, pacing be damned, we're treated to a climactic action scene. And again, this action scene isn't bad. It's entertaining on its own. The camera work is great and the choreography is great. But in the middle of this action scene, we're treated to one of the worst things I've ever seen. Sir Elton John gets up, runs right at this guy, jumps in the air and kicks him in the face, and then looks directly into the camera. And I genuinely felt embarrassed for everyone involved with this movie. This is so bad on so many levels. This is honestly insulting. So after that, Harry and Eggsy, they clear out all the bad guys on the island. She makes $250 billion a year and she can only afford a handful of mediocre henchmen. No big deal, we won't think about it. We'll keep eating our popcorn. Now all they have left to defeat are Poppy, her robot dogs, and her right-hand man, Charlie. So Eggsy fights Charlie, and Harry runs away from one of Poppy's robot dogs. And just as he's about to get caught and torn apart by the robot dog, when it's looking like this might be the end for Harry, right at the last second, an unlikely hero saves the day. Now this is just retarded, or dare I say, cringy. I mean, it makes sense within the context of the movie. The dog is programmed not to hurt Elton John, but the execution of the whole thing just comes off like this movie's trying too hard to top the first one. And then, to twist the dagger even more, after they kill the dog, Elton John makes another reference to the first movie.
Now, go off and save the world.
If I save the world, can I have 2 tickets to your next concert?
Darling, if you save the world, you can have a backstage pass.
Just so we're clear, just so we're all on the same page here, this is the second time that this movie has referenced the same exact scene.
Darling, if you save the world, you can have a backstage pass.
Well, if you save the world, you know what that means.
If you save the world, we can do it in the asshole.
So Eggsy defeats Charlie, Colin Firth pours hot gold over the last robot dog, and then they finally get to Poppy. They need her to put her password into her laptop so that all of her drones can administer the antidote to the world. So they inject her with deadly heroin, she tells them the password, but then she dies because Eggsy gave her too much heroin. Whoops! Then Harry starts typing in the password when, oh no! Whiskey comes back to try and stop him. He wants all the drug users in the world to die because some meth heads killed his wife. So he just wants them all to die. Pretty reasonable if you ask me. Then we're treated to the final action scene of this movie, which is pretty terrible. First off, they thought it would be a good idea to play this god-awful song. It's pretty distracting, I gotta tell you. But then they also thought that it would be a good idea to try and make the scene look like it was all done in one take. You know, kind of like the church scene from the first Kingsman. But instead of enhancing this scene like it did for the first movie, it winds up really detracting from this action scene. It's actually really distracting because a lot of the cuts are very obvious. They're very poorly hidden. You don't even have to be looking for them to notice them, and that ruins the illusion. Also, some of the camera movements are very synthetic and unnatural, and there's so much going on that it's really kind of tough to keep up with. Whenever I watch this scene, I can't help but think that it would be so much better if it weren't shot like this. If it were shot like the rest of the action in this movie, I think it would be pretty great. So long as they pick a different song, of course. Because the choreography is fantastic, and there's some interesting ideas here. But anyway, they kill Agent Whiskey, Eggsy enters the password, administers the antidote, and saves the day. Then Eggsy and the princess get married, and Colin Firth sets us up for a third movie.
As one of our founding Kingsmen once said, this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is, perhaps, the end of the beginning.
Then we get treated to Channing Tatum in a fancy Kingsman suit. Ha ha, isn't that funny? We all laugh. The end. The credits roll, and I leave the theater as fast as I possibly can. One of the biggest problems this movie has is that it's just so bloated. First off, it has far too many big-name actors. So many that there was no time to make their characters have any meaning throughout the movie. When you take a step back and think about it, it really does seem like some studio executive just tried to cram as many celebrities in here as he could. Kinda similar to what they did with Spider-Man 3. Somebody forced Sam Raimi to put Venom in that movie, because Venom was such a recognizable villain that they thought it would bring more people in. Much like Channing Tatum is a recognizable actor that would bring in a female audience. But putting Venom into Spider-Man 3 threw everything off. That movie was all over the place, and it just lacked focus, much like Kingsman: The Golden Girls does. And the same exact thing happened to Amazing Spider-Man 2, but to a much worse degree, since they wanted to cram all these villains into the movie so they could set up the Sinister Six. And it's okay to reference your older movies here and there in a sequel, but this movie takes it to a whole nother level. It references the first one so much. It's like they're trying to shove it down our throats to bring back the nostalgia the first movie gave us, but it just winds up being kinda distracting. Airplane 2 has the same exact problem as this movie. It was the sequel to an arguably genius and groundbreaking movie, but all it did was retread the highlights of its predecessor, even flat out using the same exact jokes the first one did, much like this movie does. And as a result, it didn't resonate with people quite like the first movie did, much like this one does. Another big problem this movie had was that it reused the same formula of the first movie, to the point where it just felt too samey. You got your fake long take action scene with a recognizable song in the background. Instead of exploding heads, you got the magnificent and beautiful Milton John kicking heads. They give us another shocking Kingsman death that nobody saw coming, a virus that affects everybody on a global scale. You got a member of the Statesmen who turns out to be a bad guy, just like Michael Caine was a bad guy in the first movie, and the list just goes on and on. But to be fair, this movie did try to do a few of its own things, like giving Eggsy a permanent girlfriend. I get that they're trying to subvert the spy movie formula a little bit, but it really just doesn't work in this movie. If you removed the princess subplot altogether, you trim out about 20 to 30 minutes of unnecessary filler, and the movie would feel tighter as a whole. I feel like Matthew Vaughn really wanted to have the princess in the movie, like it was part of his original vision, but with everything else going on, there just isn't enough time to explore her character and give her the proper treatment she needed to shine. They aren't even a good movie couple. They don't have very good chemistry, and I never felt invested in their relationship, which just serves to make scenes like this seem forced. The fact that this movie mirrors the first one so much just screams studio interference to me, because keeping a familiar formula is a safer bet as far as the studio is concerned. Because if this movie feels familiar to people, they won't be weirded out or intellectually challenged by it. So therefore, the audience won't reject it. Classic studio head mindset. It's what happens with almost every Blumhouse film. They always make sure to have the movie end with a jump scare and cut to black, because they think this pleases the audience, when in reality, literally everybody in the theater is expecting a cut to credits jump scare, because nearly every horror movie from the past 10 years has a cut to credits jump scare, and it gets old. As an example, they forced the director of Paranormal Activity to scrap his original ending and go with a jump scare instead, because it kept things familiar and, get this, it would leave more room for a sequel. They've done this with quite a few other directors as well, because it's the safe bet. And the first Kingsman was anything but safe. That's part of what made it so great. It was a risky movie when you look at it, with an $80 million budget. And then remember, typically, you double that budget for marketing. That's $160 million. That's a lot of money for a movie that isn't based on a widely known, easily recognizable brand. If the first Kingsman failed, it really would have hurt the studio's bottom line. And when you think about it, none of Matthew Vaughn's movies seem safe, really, apart from X-Men First Class. And I can see you down there in the comments saying, hey Ren, you sit there and criticize the movie, yet you offer no real substantial suggestions to fix the movie. Well, that's where you're wrong. Because while I was sitting there in the theater, watching meaningless scene after meaningless scene play out before me, I had a lot of time to conjure up a plot that would have stayed true to the Kingsman brand, evolved the existing characters, and brought in the Statesmen in a much more natural way. But let's start wrapping things up here. So the director of this movie, Matthew Vaughn, has never done a sequel to one of his own movies before. He's normally very choosy with what movies he decides to direct. Most of the movies he's done, he's been asked to come back and do the sequel. And I happen to think that he is in fact a very good director. I'm not really much of a fan of X-Men First Class, but Stardust was pretty enjoyable for what it was. Kick-Ass was great, and I absolutely loved the first Kingsman movie. Me and my girlfriend went and saw that thing opening night, and it was easily my favorite movie of 2014. The first Kingsman was so cool, so suave, so debonair. And it has what is quite possibly one of my favorite action scenes of all time. But despite all that, I came into the Golden Circle with relatively low expectations, because nothing can hurt a movie quite like high expectations can. Now, in terms of craziness and wackiness, the first movie starts off at about a 3 or a 4, and it gradually works its way up to a 10, giving the audience time to buckle up and get ready for what the movie has in store for us. Now, immediately, the Golden Shower starts off at a 10, and as a result, it has nowhere left to go, nowhere but down. The Golden Circle jerk requires you to suspend your disbelief way too much, to the point where you just start to feel alienated. It's just all over the place, which makes it kinda tough to talk about for this video. It has no pacing, no flow, it's just crammed with a bunch of bollocks. They just threw in whatever big name actors they could get their hands on, just to put them in the trailer, put them on the poster, and none of them even do anything. Jeff Bridges is in the movie for like 4 minutes and contributes nothing. Same goes for Halle Berry. She's just there, doing nothing, like a dead body at your mom's house, not adding anything to the birthday party. Just sitting there, lifeless. Wake up, Grandma, wake up! But you know what I think? I think that when it comes to movies, if you give the audience what they expect, they'll be bored. There are no rules. You can do what you want while respecting the boundaries. You don't poke people in the eye. You do things they haven't seen before, but make it accessible, funny, and clever. Except I didn't come up with that. That's a direct quote from the director, Matthew Vaughn, Vince Vaughn's nephew. And it's a quote that I happen to agree with. And this whole entire movie spits all over that quote. He gave us exactly what we expected by recreating the first movie beat for beat. And he didn't respect the boundaries by breaking the movie's universe with devices that bring people back from the dead. And he ruined Colin Firth's character by turning him into an incompetent amnesiac. And while he didn't poke us in the eye, he did poke someone in the vagina. Now, like I said, Matthew Vaughn is a very talented director. He's got a great track record, which is partly what makes me think that he's not all responsible for how awful this movie is. This movie is just riddled with issues that can usually be attributed to studio interference. And 20th Century Fox has a very long and outstanding history of ruining movies through studio interference, going as far back as Alien 3 in 1992. And this is a big budgeted movie. It's certainly one that the producers would want to safeguard. It's quite the investment. This is also Matthew Vaughn's lowest rated Rotten Tomatoes movie by far. I mean, it is entirely possible that Matthew Vaughn made a terrible movie, but I don't think it was.
Making a movie is like giving birth. I'm at that stage where it's really hard work, and so the idea of making another movie right now is they've got a few scars that need to heal, but at the same time, it's definitely worth doing.
Hopefully for the third Kingsman, which has already been announced, Matthew Vaughn fights the studio a little bit harder. And while this is far from the worst movie I've ever seen, it's still a pile of trash. And I can't help but look at it and wonder what could have been. Sometimes I think that Matthew Vaughn just wanted to stay on this project because he didn't want somebody else ruining this franchise and all these characters that he created. Maybe he just stayed on for damage control, but we'll never really know, since he and all the other actors are contractually obligated not to speak out against the studio. Sometimes you'll get lucky and see an outburst every now and then, but that's usually only when the movie flops. But I'm losing my voice from yelling about this awful movie for the past hour, so that's all I got for this video, guys. I'll be back to talking about video games again in my next video. I just had to get this video off my chest. I've been wanting to make this video since the opening night of this movie, and it felt good. I'll be honest, it felt good. And I'm also going to pimp out my Patreon for this video, which isn't something I normally do, but I've literally spent the last 2.5 weeks of my life making this video. I've pulled 3 all-nighters just so that I can get it done in a timely fashion. And if by some miracle this thing doesn't get demonetized, I'm almost certain it'll get hit with a copyright strike, despite my best efforts to prevent that from happening. Until then, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.